If you've been thinking of buying a new iPad, stop. Don't click the add to cart button on that iPad Air on Amazon because Apple is about to release some newly updated iPads. And this time, they're not simple spec updates. Apple's about to completely redesign most of their iPad lineup. And I personally have a very good idea of what each redesigned iPad is gonna look like. So before I get into explaining the redesigned iPads, I want to show you guys the evidence for these new releases in terms of recent leaks and rumors. The most important one is the fact that Apple has recently filed 7 new iPad models with the EEC, or the Eurasian Economic Commission. Basically, if Apple wants to sell a device that uses encryption technology in certain European countries, they are required to make EEC filings for each device before it gets released. This happens for basically every Apple device, like back in June when Apple made filings for all of the upcoming iPhone 12 models. And in the past, Apple has almost always announced the newly filed devices within a couple of months after making the filing. So these new iPads will probably be announced before the end of November. Now you might be a little confused about Apple making 7 filings for iPads, so let me explain that number. Apple's iPads come in either Wi-Fi models or LTE cellular models, and each of those counts as its own EEC filing. And sometimes Apple makes 2 separate filings for the LTE models, for a total of 3 filings for just one specific iPad, like they did with the iPad Pro last year. So I've been studying the model numbers for each iPad that was released within the last couple of years, and I think I figured out which iPads we should be expecting thanks to new rumors and leaks. Here's the list of the newly filed 7 model numbers. So let's start with these 3 in the center, which I think are actually for the iPad Air 4. Last year's iPad Air 3 had 4 model numbers, one of which was for China, so it doesn't show up in the European filings. But these other 3 numbers seem to closely resemble the pattern that I'm seeing in the newly filed numbers. So before we get started with the iPad Air 4 leaks and rumors, definitely check out our new Apple product merch like our new zip-up hoodie and our Apple product mask down in the merch shelf below. Rumors for the iPad Air 4 started earlier this year, and I made a video in May which contained all of those rumors of a low-cost 11-inch iPad, which is of course the iPad Air 4. And even back in March, leakers like Love to Dream claim that the new iPad Air will come with a full mini LED screen with no notch and no Face ID, but Touch ID instead under the display. Now we did have a lot of rumors of mini LED being delayed until next year, so I wouldn't count on that display, but the rest of it could actually be true. I am almost 100% confident that the iPad Air 4 will take on the same body as the current 11-inch iPad Pro. This actually makes a lot of sense because in 2018, when the iPad Pro took on the 11-inch display, it ditched the old 10.5-inch display. And that's the exact same body and display that the iPad Air 3 has. In fact, it was almost identical to the old 10.5-inch iPad Pro, with the only physical difference being the lack of speaker grills on the top. So the iPad Air 4 could very well likely take on the 11-inch body. But there was a whole lot of jazz about a new 10.8-inch iPad being released, which could be this iPad Air having a slightly smaller display within the same 11-inch body, or it could actually be a budget iPad, which I'll get into in just a minute. Very recently, there was an iPad Air 4 manual that was leaked, basically showing off the new design, which looks basically identical to the 11-inch iPad Pro. And in that manual, it mentioned a USB-C port and a smart connector. This means that we should 100% expect support for the 2nd gen Apple Pencil. There was also no reference to Face ID, rather pointing to Touch ID being integrated into the power button, but I personally think the rumors of an in-display fingerprint reader make more sense. And because this is the iPad Air, don't expect the same great features that you get on the iPad Pro. So that means no 120Hz display, no quad speakers, and no crazy A14X chip. Instead, I'm expecting the A13 chip from the iPhone 11 in this iPad Air, which means that Apple is likely to release this iPad before their iPhone 12s get announced, because they'll be packing the even better A14 chip. And according to John Prosser, the Apple Watch and the iPad should be released via a press release on September 7th. So I think there's a chance that Apple will also release the iPad Air 4 through the same press release. And you might be asking, why would Apple give the iPad Air the same 11-inch body as the iPad Pro? Well, I believe that Apple wants to sell more of their Magic Keyboard case. And since we saw rumors of the Magic Keyboard supporting not only the iPad Pro, but more iPad models, this makes me almost 100% sure that the current Magic Keyboard will fit the iPad Air 4 perfectly. And that's exactly what that leaked manual mentioned as well. Now moving on to the second set of model numbers on the bottom, I believe these are for the upcoming 2020 budget iPad, thanks to a tweet from John Prosser, who expects a new budget iPad alongside the iPad Air this year. The rumors for this device started in March, with the reliable analyst Ming-Chi Kuo claiming that Apple would release a new 10.2-inch iPad this year. And then the leaker Love to Dream also claimed that the 2020 iPad would come with the A12 chip, which makes sense since the budget iPad currently has a pretty old A10 chip, so it always gets the leftovers. A couple of months later, Kuo updated his expectations and said that there would be a new 10.8-inch iPad this year. So based on all those rumors, we'll likely get a new budget iPad being released via a press release alongside the Apple Watch on September 7th. And as for the rumored 10.8-inch display size, there's a chance that if the iPad Air gets updated with the current iPad Pro's design, then the new budget iPad could take on the current iPad Air's 10.5-inch body, and then it could ditch the home button for an extra bit of display size to get it up to the 10.8-inch display. In that case, it could get the same under-display fingerprint sensor, or it could go with Touch ID built into the power button instead. But on the other hand, Apple could very well leave it with the same 10.2-inch display that it already has and simply update the specs. And if you think about it, a full redesign with a 10.8-inch display is big enough news for Apple to warrant the iPad being released at an event, not through a simple press release. But as for the features, expect the same old Lightning port with support for the same first-gen Apple Pencil, expect the A12 chip, and probably the same display technology as the current iPad Air, but that's about all that's going to change. Now finally getting into those last two iPad model numbers, I actually think it's for a new version of the iPad Pro, but before I get into that, let me explain why I don't think it's going to be the iPad mini. Ming-Chi Kuo mentioned back in June that Apple would release a redesigned 8.5-inch iPad mini in 2021. And basically every other leak and rumor I've seen points to it being released next year, so don't expect it to come in 2020. And with that, let's get into the iPad Pro. This one's a bit surprising because for the past few months, all of the rumors were pointing to a new 5G mini LED display iPad Pro coming early next year and not this year. But if we take a look back to December of 2019, Ming-Chi Kuo predicted that in the third quarter of 2020, Apple would release a 12.9-inch iPad Pro with an A14X chip. This prediction is a little bit weird since Apple usually updates both sizes of the iPad Pro at the same time, but he exclusively mentioned the 12.9-inch model. Now if we take a look at those last two filing model numbers and compare them to the previous 12.9-inch iPad model, you can definitely see a pattern there. And we all know that the upcoming Apple Silicon Macs are coming later this year, and most likely being announced in late October or sometime in November. And those Macs will be coming with new chips that are going to be built on the A14X chip, which is expected to come on the new iPad Pro. So it would make total sense for Apple to host an event and show off the capabilities of the new A14X chip being packed into the 12.9-inch iPad Pro before showing off the new Apple Silicon SoC family that's going to be going into the first Apple Silicon Macs. Now as for the other features of the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, I don't think we'll be seeing any major changes. We'll likely just get the A14X chip and possibly 5G LTE support. we'll probably get the new 20-watt charger and some camera updates. So definitely keep an eye out for that event, which will likely be online only at either the end of October or sometime in November. And there you guys have it. That's why you shouldn't be buying an iPad right now, and instead waiting at least a couple of weeks for the budget iPad and iPad Air, and probably a few months for a new 12.9-inch iPad Pro. If this video helped you out, go ahead and click the circle above to subscribe so you don't miss out on the reviews of those upcoming iPads, and definitely check out our Apple product merch down in our merch shelf below, like this mask or our new zip-up hoodie. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.